The morning of May 18, 2023, dawned with an eerie stillness over Greenwich, Connecticut. The affluent town, known for its quiet charm and sprawling estates, was shaken to its core when the blaring sirens of police cars and ambulances disrupted the serene neighborhood. Their destination, a grand, ivy-draped mansion nestled in a secluded corner of the prestigious Laurelwood neighborhood. This was the home of Richard Jameson, a titan of industry and a man revered, and feared, by many. Inside the mansion's gleaming marble-floored kitchen, a scene of unspeakable violence awaited. Richard, 78, lay motionless on the ground, his pristine white dress shirt soaked in deep crimson. Blood pooled around his body, staining the immaculate tilework of the designer kitchen. A knife, its blade still smeared with blood, rested discarded a few feet away. The faint scent of iron lingered in the air, mingling with the sharp tang of bleach, a chilling testament to an attempt at cleaning up the scene. Detectives swarmed the area, their faces grim as they surveyed the chaos. To the untrained eye, it looked like the result of a brutal robbery gone wrong, but something about the scene didn't sit right with lead investigator Detective Lisa Romero. The precision of the stab wounds, the absence of any signs of forced entry, this was personal. Deliberate. The house itself bore no signs of disarray, save for the violent tableau in the kitchen. Richard's study remained untouched, his collection of rare antiques and family heirlooms unscathed. Romero's gaze flickered to a photo frame resting on a side table near the doorway, a family portrait taken just a year earlier. Richard stood at the center, flanked by his grandson, Elliot Jameson, and Elliot's girlfriend, Tracy Harper. The trio smiled serenely, an image of familial harmony. But even then, Romero could sense the cracks hidden behind those practiced expressions. As the investigators pieced together the timeline, suspicions quickly began to converge on Tracy. Footage from the mansion's security cameras revealed her arriving at the estate the night before. The timestamp, 9:37 p.m., was mere hours before Richard was last seen alive. No one else had entered or exited the property during that window. Adding fuel to the fire, her fingerprints were found on the knife left at the scene. Questions arose: why had she been there? What business did she have with Richard, especially so late at night? And why hadn't she called the authorities upon discovering his body? Neighbors whispered in hushed tones as the news broke, the tale spreading like wildfire through the elite circles of Greenwich. To them, the Jamesons were untouchable, their wealth and influence shielding them from scandal. But now, that veneer of perfection was shattered, exposing something far darker underneath. Detective Romero knew this was no ordinary case. The deeper she delved into the lives of the Jamesons and the enigmatic Tracy Harper, the clearer it became that the answers weren't as simple as they seemed. What had transpired in the hours leading to Richard's death? And more importantly, what secrets were the Jamesons hiding behind the gilded walls of their estate? The investigation was just beginning, but one thing was certain: the Jameson family would never be the same again. The summer of 2022 shimmered with promise as the Jameson family prepared for their annual midsummer gathering. The event, hosted at Richard Jameson's stately mansion in Greenwich, was a tradition as opulent as it was exclusive. Business associates, extended family members, and a select few from Connecticut's elite were invited to mingle over champagne and hors d'oeuvres beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers. For Tracy Harper, it was a chance to step into a world far removed from her modest upbringing in New Haven. As the girlfriend of Elliot Jameson, Richard's ambitious and impeccably polished grandson, Tracy often felt like a visitor in a museum, fascinated, yet acutely aware of her outsider status. But on that particular evening, she was determined to make an impression. Dressed in a sleek navy gown that complemented her auburn hair, Tracy exuded the charm and confidence she hoped would blend seamlessly into this world. From the moment she entered the room, Richard's presence was impossible to ignore. Towering and impeccably dressed, he moved through the crowd with the ease of a seasoned diplomat. At 78, his hair had turned silver, but his sharp wit and commanding voice made him the center of every conversation. To Tracy, he was equal parts intimidating and intriguing, the embodiment of power and refinement. Their first interaction came unexpectedly. As Tracy admired a painting in the grand hallway, Richard appeared beside her, his deep voice breaking the silence. "An original," he remarked, gesturing to the abstract piece before them. "One of a kind, much like its admirer." Tracy blushed, caught off guard by the unexpected compliment. "It's beautiful," she replied, her voice steady despite the sudden flutter in her chest. "I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like it." Richard smiled, his gaze lingering on her. "Neither have I." That evening marked the beginning of something neither of them could fully articulate. Richard's charm was undeniable, and Tracy, flattered by the attention of a man so esteemed, found herself drawn into his orbit. Their conversations deepened with each passing week. At first, it was harmless, light-hearted discussions during family dinners, shared jokes that left Elliot oblivious. But as the summer unfolded, a subtle tension began to build. Richard's attention grew more pointed. He would seek out Tracy at every gathering, his compliments becoming more personal. "You've brought a certain brightness to this family," he told her during a quiet moment on the terrace one evening. "Elliot's lucky to have you." "We all are." Tracy wasn't naive. She felt the weight of his gaze, the way his eyes followed her movements longer than was appropriate. And yet, she didn't walk away. There was something intoxicating about the way Richard made her feel, seen, appreciated, desired in a way she hadn't felt with Elliot in months. Elliot, consumed by his studies at Columbia and his aspirations to live up to his grandfather's expectations, seemed increasingly distant. Their conversations, once filled with laughter and plans for the future, had become routine. He didn't notice when Tracy lingered at the Jameson estate longer than necessary. He didn't question the late-night texts she received or the subtle shifts in her demeanor. By late June, Tracy found herself spending more and more time at the mansion. On the surface, her visits were innocent, helping Elliot prepare for a family event or assisting with small errands for Richard. But beneath the pretense, her conversations with Richard grew in intimacy. He shared stories of his youth, tales of ambition and triumph, woven with just enough vulnerability to disarm her. "Elliot's a good man," Richard said one afternoon, his tone almost wistful. "But he doesn't see you the way you deserve to be seen." "Not yet." Tracy knew she should stop. The lines were blurring, and with each passing day, it became harder to justify her actions. She told herself it was just a harmless connection, an escape from the monotony of her relationship with Elliot. But deep down, she couldn't deny the thrill, the way Richard made her feel alive in a way Elliot no longer could. The foundation of the Jameson family seemed unshakable from the outside, but by the end of June 2022, fissures had begun to form. What started as an innocent rapport between Tracy and Richard was evolving into something far more dangerous, setting the stage for the tangled web of deception and betrayal that would follow. By mid-July 2022, what began as a seemingly harmless connection between Tracy Harper and Richard Jameson had transformed into a secretive, complicated relationship. The thrill of stolen moments and hushed conversations was intoxicating, but Tracy's growing guilt lingered in the shadows of her every interaction with Elliot. She told herself it was temporary, an escape from the monotony of her life. Yet, deep down, she felt the tangled web tightening around her. Meanwhile, Elliot was beginning to notice the cracks. Tracy's demeanor had shifted, her once vibrant laughter was now tinged with unease, and her affectionate gestures toward him had grown increasingly distant. She began leaving their shared plans unexplained, often retreating to the Jameson estate under the pretense of helping with family matters. At first, Elliot dismissed his unease as paranoia, chalking it up to the stress of juggling his studies at Columbia and his family's lofty expectations. But as the weeks passed, the inconsistencies in Tracy's behavior became impossible to ignore. One evening, after Tracy abruptly canceled dinner plans, Elliot decided to follow her. His heart pounded as he trailed her car down the winding roads leading to his grandfather's mansion. He parked a discreet distance away, watching as she entered the grand estate. Minutes turned into hours. When Tracy finally re-emerged, her expression was one of nervous excitement. Elliot couldn't shake the sinking feeling in his chest. Something was happening behind those gilded walls, something he wasn't a part of. Elliot began digging deeper. His suspicions about Tracy were growing, but what he unearthed next would shatter his perception of his family. In his search for answers, he stumbled upon old documents in the Jameson family archives, a collection of financial records and private correspondence stored in his grandfather's study. What Elliot discovered was more damning than he could have imagined. Richard Jameson, the patriarch revered by his peers, wasn't the unassailable figure he appeared to be. The records revealed a series of questionable business dealings stretching back decades, bribes to local officials, silent payoffs to competitors, and even a carefully concealed lawsuit involving allegations of harassment. Buried among the papers was a letter from Elliot's late mother, who had written to Richard years before her death. In it, she described her strained relationship with him, accusing him of manipulation and emotional abuse that had fractured her marriage to Elliot's father. The weight of the revelations crushed Elliot. The man he had idolized was a fraud, a tyrant who had spent his life wielding power over anyone who crossed his path. His mother's words haunted him. "You think you control everything, but your legacy will destroy this family." Elliot's grief turned to anger as he pieced together the truth. Richard's influence wasn't limited to his business empire, it extended into their personal lives, shaping the Jameson family into a facade of unity while controlling them with invisible strings. Elliot wondered if Tracy, too, had become ensnared in his grandfather's web. When Elliot confronted Tracy about her frequent visits to the estate, she denied any wrongdoing, her voice trembling as she assured him it was all for him, to support his family. But her evasive answers and the flicker of panic in her eyes only deepened his suspicions. Tracy had never been a skilled liar, and now, her every word felt like a carefully rehearsed performance. Desperate for clarity, Elliot decided to confront Richard directly. The exchange was tense, with Richard effortlessly deflecting Elliot's accusations. "You're overthinking, boy," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "Your priorities should be on your future, not chasing ghosts in the past." But Elliot refused to back down. He knew Richard was hiding something, and that something involved Tracy. The once clear lines of loyalty and trust within the Jameson family had blurred, leaving Elliot isolated in his quest for the truth. By December 2022, the tension in the family had reached a boiling point. Elliot, armed with the knowledge of his grandfather's corrupt past, began distancing himself from the Jameson legacy. Tracy, caught between the growing dominance of Richard and her crumbling relationship with Elliot, felt the walls closing in around her. What none of them realized was that the secrets they were guarding so fiercely would soon explode into a chain of events that would forever redefine the Jameson family, and lead to the devastating night in May 2023. The new year brought little relief to the growing tensions within the Jameson family. By January 2023, the once contained cracks in their seemingly perfect lives had widened into dangerous fissures. Elliot Jameson, burdened with the weight of his grandfather's dark legacy in his own unraveling relationship with Tracy Harper, found himself adrift in a storm of suspicion and betrayal. Meanwhile, Richard Jameson's grasp on Tracy tightened, his actions becoming more overtly possessive and manipulative. For Tracy, the sense of being trapped was becoming unbearable. Richard's charm, once intoxicating, now felt like a suffocating noose. He had a way of always knowing where she was, what she was doing, and whom she was speaking to. His calls grew incessant, his words laced with both promises and veiled threats. "You don't understand, Tracy," he said one evening, his voice low and cold. "I've built everything Elliot has. Everything you have. Without me, you're nothing. Don't ever forget that." Tracy tried to pull away, to spend less time at the Jameson estate, but Richard always found a way to reel her back in. He began orchestrating reasons for her to visit, an important family matter to discuss, a new project she could help Elliot with. These requests came with an unspoken rule: refusal wasn't an option. Elliot, meanwhile, grew more isolated. His attempts to confront Tracy about her behavior led to tense arguments, with Tracy deflecting and avoiding direct answers. "I'm doing this for you," she would insist, though the conviction in her voice faltered each time. Elliot wanted to believe her, but the secrecy surrounding her late-night visits to his grandfather's mansion was impossible to ignore. By February, the tension between Elliot and Tracy reached its peak. One night, after a particularly heated argument, Elliot decided to take matters into his own hands. While Tracy was asleep, he accessed her phone and found a series of messages from Richard. They were vague but suggestive, their tone far too personal for comfort. One message read, "I meant every word I said. You're special, Tracy, in ways Elliot will never understand. Come by tomorrow night. We need to talk, just the two of us." The words ignited a firestorm in Elliot's mind. The betrayal wasn't just about Tracy, it was the culmination of years of resentment toward his grandfather. For as long as he could remember, Richard had controlled every aspect of his life, his education, his career, even his relationships. And now, it seemed, Richard was taking Tracy away from him too. Elliot confronted Tracy the next morning, his voice shaking with anger as he showed her the messages. Tracy, cornered, broke down in tears but refused to provide the answers Elliot demanded. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You can't fix this." As March rolled in, Richard's behavior grew more erratic. He began showing up unannounced at Tracy's workplace, leaving her gifts that she couldn't return without risking his wrath. His promises of a luxurious future turned darker, laced with threats of what would happen if she ever tried to leave him. "You think you can just walk away?" he hissed during one particularly tense encounter. "I built this world for you, Tracy. If you think you can leave without consequences, you're delusional." The psychological toll was crushing. Tracy began withdrawing from her friends and family, consumed by the fear of what Richard might do, not just to her, but to Elliot. She knew Richard's threats weren't empty, his influence was vast, his power unyielding. By April, the tension within the Jameson family had reached a breaking point. Elliot, armed with the messages and the knowledge of his grandfather's corrupt past, began formulating a plan to expose Richard. He secretly contacted a journalist, providing them with documents and details of Richard's financial improprieties. Tracy, meanwhile, was spiraling. The weight of her secrets, combined with Richard's relentless control, pushed her to the edge. She knew she had to end things, but every attempt to break free was met with more threats. Richard had made it clear, leaving wasn't an option. One evening in mid-April, Tracy confided in a close friend, the only person she trusted with the truth. "I'm trapped," she admitted, her voice trembling. "He won't let me go, and if I don't stop this, it's going to destroy all of us." Her friend urged her to seek help, but Tracy was too scared. Richard's reach extended far beyond the Jameson estate, and she knew exposing him would come at a steep cost. As the days ticked by, the fragile balance holding the Jameson family together began to crumble. The stage was set for a confrontation that none of them would escape unscathed. What none of them realized was that the storm brewing within their family would soon explode into a night of violence that would change everything. The night of May 18, 2023, was eerily quiet at the Jameson estate. The grand mansion, bathed in the soft glow of its outdoor lights, stood as a testament to the power and prestige of Richard Jameson. But inside its walls, a storm was brewing, one that would shatter the Jameson family forever. Tracy Harper sat in her car outside the estate, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. Her heart pounded as she stared at the imposing facade of the house. She had spent the past few weeks spiraling under the weight of Richard's threats and manipulation. Every attempt to distance herself had been met with resistance, his words slicing through her like a blade. You think you can just walk away? You belong to me now. You and Elliot both. Tracy knew she couldn't keep living this way. She had rehearsed what she would say to Richard over and over in her mind. Tonight was the night she would end it, for good. Taking a deep breath, Tracy stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching under her heels as she made her way to the front door. The mansion was silent, save for the faint hum of the security system. She let herself in with the key Richard had insisted she keep, her steps echoing in the vast, empty foyer. Richard was in the kitchen, sipping a glass of whiskey as he leaned against the marble countertop. He looked up as Tracy entered, a sly smile curling at the corners of his mouth. "Ah, Tracy," he drawled, setting his glass down. "I was wondering when you'd come to your senses." His calm demeanor only fueled her anger. "This has to stop, Richard," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "I can't do this anymore. I'm done." Richard's smile vanished, replaced by a cold, steely glare. "Done?" he repeated, his tone sharp. "You don't get to decide when this ends." "I do." Tracy stood her ground, her fear giving way to fury. "You don't own me," she snapped. "I'm not some pawn in your twisted game. I want out, and I mean it." Richard chuckled darkly, shaking his head. "You're naive if you think you can just walk away. Do you have any idea what I could do to you? To Elliot?" He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "One call from me, and his future is over. His career, his life, it'll all crumble, and it'll be your fault." Tracy felt the walls closing in around her. The air seemed to grow heavier, the room shrinking with every step Richard took toward her. Panic surged through her veins as he loomed over her, his presence suffocating. "You don't get it, do you?" he continued. "You owe me everything. Without me, you're nothing." Something inside Tracy snapped. Months of fear, manipulation, and helplessness boiled over into a single, desperate moment. Her eyes darted to the kitchen counter, where a knife glinted under the overhead lights. Before she could think, her hand shot out, fingers wrapping around the hilt. "Stay back," she warned, her voice shaking as she pointed the blade at him. But Richard only laughed, a cold, cruel sound that echoed in the silent room. "You don't have it in you," he sneered, stepping closer. "You're just a scared little girl pretending to be strong." The words cut deeper than any knife could. In that instant, Tracy felt a surge of adrenaline overpower her fear. As Richard lunged forward, she acted on instinct. The knife plunged into his chest with a sickening thud, his eyes widening in shock. Blood seeped through his shirt, staining the pristine fabric a deep crimson. Richard staggered back, clutching at the wound as he sank to the floor. Tracy stood frozen, the knife slipping from her trembling hands and clattering to the tiles. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she stared at his motionless body, the weight of what she had done crashing over her like a tidal wave. The house fell deathly silent, the only sound the faint drip of blood pooling beneath Richard. Tracy backed away, her mind racing. She hadn't meant for this to happen. She had only wanted to protect herself, to escape his control. But now, there was no turning back. Panic overtook her as she fled the scene, her footsteps echoing through the empty halls. She didn't stop running until she was back in her car, her hands shaking as she fumbled with the keys. As she drove away from the estate, the gravity of her actions loomed over her like a dark cloud. Richard Jameson was dead, and nothing would ever be the same again. Unbeknownst to Tracy, the events of that night would unleash a storm of secrets and lies that would tear the Jameson family apart, and expose the darkness hidden behind their gilded facade. The morning after Richard Jameson's murder, the Jameson estate was a hive of activity. Police cars lined the driveway, their flashing lights casting an eerie glow on the mansion's grand facade. Crime scene investigators moved methodically through the house, cataloging every detail. At the center of it all lay Richard's lifeless body, a stark contrast to the opulence surrounding him. The discovery was made by Elliot Jameson, who had arrived at the estate early that morning. The silence of the house had been unsettling, the slight ajar of the front door immediately putting him on edge. As he ventured inside, the sight of his grandfather's body sprawled on the kitchen floor, blood pooled beneath him, sent a wave of shock and nausea through Elliot. He stumbled backward, fumbling for his phone to call the police, his voice shaking as he reported the scene. Within hours, the Greenwich Police Department launched a full-scale investigation. Detective Lisa Romero, a seasoned investigator known for her tenacity, led the case. Her first impression of the scene was clear: this was no random act of violence. The meticulous nature of the mansion, no signs of forced entry, no valuables taken, indicated that the crime was personal. Security footage quickly pointed investigators in a troubling direction. The tapes showed Tracy Harper, Elliot's girlfriend, entering the house the previous night and leaving hours later, shortly before midnight. Adding to the suspicion, a knife matching the wounds on Richard's body bore Tracy's fingerprints. Detective Romero wasted no time bringing Tracy in for questioning. When confronted with the evidence, Tracy was visibly shaken but denied any involvement in the murder. "I went to talk to him," she explained, her voice trembling. "We argued, but when I left, he was alive." Her claim of innocence did little to convince the detectives. The physical evidence and the inconsistencies in her story were stacking up against her. While the police focused on Tracy, Elliot delved deeper into his grandfather's life, determined to uncover the full extent of Richard's secrets. He combed through old documents, re-examining the records he had found months earlier. This time, he noticed a pattern, a trail of payments, forged contracts, and evidence of manipulation that painted a damning picture of Richard's character. But what shocked Elliot most was a journal hidden in the back of Richard's safe. In its pages, Richard detailed his relationship with Tracy, not as a lover, but as a possession. His words revealed the extent of his control, his threats, and his belief that Tracy would never escape him. "She's mine," Richard wrote. "I've given her everything, and she will repay me, one way or another." Elliot felt his anger boil over. The man he had once idolized was not only a tyrant but a predator. This wasn't just about Tracy, it was about everyone Richard had manipulated, including Elliot himself. The journal provided context to Tracy's fear and desperation, but it also raised more questions. Was her act one of calculated revenge, or had she been pushed to the brink? By early June, the investigation reached a pivotal moment. Forensic analysis confirmed that the knife used in the murder was indeed the one Tracy had touched. Surveillance footage from a nearby house captured her car parked outside the estate for several hours that night. And yet, Tracy maintained her innocence. Detective Romero began piecing together an alternative theory. Interviews with Tracy's friends and co-workers painted a picture of a woman under immense pressure, manipulated by a man who used his wealth and influence to trap her. "He made her feel like she couldn't leave," one friend confessed. She was terrified of what he might do, to her and to Elliot. This narrative gained traction when Elliot came forward with Richard's journal. The entries corroborated Tracy's claims of psychological abuse, but they also hinted at Richard's own unstable state of mind. It became clear to Romero that this case wasn't just about a murder, it was about power, control, and a woman pushed to her breaking point. On June 10, 2023, Tracy was officially arrested and charged with second-degree murder. The media frenzy that followed was relentless. Headlines painted her as both a cold-blooded killer and a victim of Richard's manipulations. Public opinion was deeply divided. Some sympathized with Tracy, seeing her as a woman who had fought back against an abusive, powerful man. Others viewed her as an opportunist who had played a dangerous game and lost. Elliot, meanwhile, withdrew from public life, devastated by the loss of his grandfather and the betrayal of the woman he thought he loved. He couldn't bring himself to attend Tracy's arraignment, choosing instead to focus on exposing the darker truths of his family's legacy. As the investigation concluded, the stage was set for what promised to be a sensational trial. The defense prepared to argue that Tracy had acted in self-defense, citing Richard's history of abuse and manipulation. The prosecution, however, focused on the cold facts, the security footage, the fingerprints, and the knife. For the Jameson family, the fallout was only beginning. The once proud name that symbolized power and success was now synonymous with scandal and tragedy. And for Tracy Harper, the truth was both her greatest weapon and her heaviest burden. The question that lingered in everyone's mind was simple: would justice prevail, or would the secrets of the Jameson estate remain hidden forever? The summer sun bore down on the crowded steps of the Fairfield County Courthouse as reporters jostled for position, microphones in hand, cameras rolling. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with tension. The trial of Tracy Harper for the murder of Richard Jameson had captured the nation's attention, dividing public opinion and exposing the dark underbelly of one of Connecticut's most prominent families. Over the course of 2 weeks, the prosecution and defense painted starkly different pictures of Tracy. The prosecution argued that she was a manipulative woman who had exploited Richard for personal gain, then turned on him when their relationship spiraled out of control. They presented the security footage, the fingerprints on the knife, and Tracy's presence at the estate as damning evidence of her guilt. The defense, however, told a story of survival. They highlighted Richard's history of manipulation and control, using excerpts from his private journal to reveal his obsession with Tracy and his threats against her. They argued that Tracy acted in a moment of self-defense, pushed to the brink by a man who had systematically dismantled her sense of safety and autonomy. Elliot Jameson, a key figure in the drama, did not attend the trial. He had distanced himself from both Tracy and his family's tarnished legacy, retreating to New York to rebuild his life. In a rare statement to the press, he expressed conflicted feelings about the case. "I don't condone what happened, but I understand why it did. My grandfather was not the man people thought he was." On August 25, 2023, the jury returned its verdict: guilty of second-degree murder. Tracy was sentenced to 15 years in prison, a sentence reduced due to the evidence of Richard's psychological abuse and the circumstances surrounding the act. As the judge read the sentence, Tracy stood silently, tears streaming down her face. For her, the courtroom was both a place of condemnation and catharsis. While she would serve time for her actions, the truth of Richard Jameson's abusive nature had been laid bare for all to see. The man who had once been untouchable was now remembered as a symbol of unchecked power and its devastating consequences. The Jameson family name, once synonymous with wealth and influence, was now irrevocably tarnished. Richard's business empire faced scrutiny, with investigations uncovering a network of corruption that extended far beyond the family estate. Former associates distanced themselves, and the mansion in Greenwich, a place that had once symbolized success, was quietly listed for sale. Elliot, estranged from his family and haunted by the betrayal of both his grandfather and Tracy, sought solace in anonymity. He chose to leave behind the legacy he had once been groomed to inherit, forging a new path untainted by the shadows of his past. For Tracy, life behind bars was a stark contrast to the gilded world she had once aspired to join. Yet, there was a strange sense of relief in knowing the truth was finally out. She had lost her freedom, but she had regained something far more precious: the ability to tell her story, unfiltered and unapologetic. The trial and its aftermath sparked a national conversation about power dynamics, manipulation, and the hidden dangers of toxic relationships. Advocacy groups used Tracy's case to highlight the need for stronger support systems for individuals trapped in abusive situations. The story served as both a cautionary tale and a call to action, urging people to recognize the signs of control and coercion before it's too late. As the dust settled, one question lingered: could any of this have been prevented? Was Tracy truly a victim pushed too far, or had she made choices that sealed her fate long before that fateful night? And now, we turn to you. What do you think about Tracy's actions? Was justice served in this case? Do you believe Richard's influence justified her desperate act, or was there another way out? If you were in Tracy's position, what would you have done differently? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more gripping stories that explore the dark corners of human nature. See you in the next video.